started working together this week, right?
Yeah.
We did a consultation about a week ago, a little over a week ago. This is our second session this week. You spent most of your life early on binging, right? Bulimia.
Mm-hmm.
And then you went into about how many years of anorexia? 14 years?
14.
14 years of anorexia, and that 14 years you were treating yourself as if you had a food addiction. So you
Yes.
abstained from sugar and carbs and certain foods, and you went to meetings, group meetings and whatnot. And then obviously things became less easy to control, and now you're back to where you were prior to the anorexia, which is more of a bulimic type of binge eating phase. But in this phase, you met someone, and now you're going to be getting married.
Yes.
So, anyways, with that said, so the years of anorexia, you were married to thinness. That's what I had just said. I was like, well, because you were saying, Robin, but the thing is this, even though there's all this shame and there's all this kind of dark feelings about myself with the eating, but when I could control the food and my body did get thinner, I felt really good. I felt, what was the word you used? Just felt
free. Like I felt if I cut my head off, I was free. My body was free. I could fit into normal clothes. I could be active.
Yeah, but your whole brain was married to thinness, and we were because of the amount of obsession, really.
Yeah,
it required
and fear of eating.
And fear of eating. I think that's really relevant, what you just said, because and you had just said to me, and this is what I wanted when I said, we need to record this. You said to me, but here's the thing, Robin. When I was that thin, it never was good enough. It never felt. It felt the illusion was that it was free, but I never felt free. It never was good enough.
Well, yeah, and the thing of it was, in my mind, I was never like, I hadn't gotten there. I never got to this ideal weight.
Your goal weight.
Even though I was there, and I just felt like I needed to be thinner or different or tone or whatever.
Yeah. That would make you feel better. That would be what you need to do. Yeah. Well, and that's the mirage that people chase. You could be, and don't you agree that because you had lived an amount of your life overweight before that, that when you got to that leanness, when you got to the golden statue zone of thinness, that it literally became the most important thing in your life.
Yeah.
To where it took over everything.
The other thing is I couldn't stay there so long. It's like I felt like I was there for 5 minutes. I mean, I probably was there longer, but then the up and down of trying to get back there, even within the restrictions.
Yeah, well, so then you became, it's like going into a microscope, and then the weight becomes super magnified. So I'm assuming at that point that you started micromanaging your weight, like 132, 134, 135.3. So you started to look at those micro points of the scale.
Being aggravated, I can't get back to 126.
Yeah, because you're fixated on 126 as the safe spot. It's the zone where I'll feel total freedom. But again, that's the mirage, because you don't get freedom. You have to stay in the cage to keep it. And that's what you did for a good decade, is you stayed in an isolated cage, married to your thin body and the diet restrictions, which you thought were healthy, to maintain it, because it was the most important thing that you focus on, because your weight is the purpose of life. Your weight is your purpose in life, is to be thin, right?
Well, I just thought my life would start after that.
Yeah, well, that doesn't happen because of the amount of work it takes to just sustain that, right? I mean, just think of that thought. Go back in your mind to the reality of what it took. It's quite naive to think that once you're thin, your life is going to change, because you're not taking into account the level of obsession it required for you to just manage your weight and to just manage the micro scale of your weight. Because you're 128, it's not 126. Because, oh my God, I'm 130, 132.2, but now I'm down to 129. So that becomes all you think about. So do you ever get freedom once you lose the weight? Does it even exist?
No, it doesn't.
No, it's a fantasy. There is this weird euphoria around, I have the safe zone body, but then that comes on the flip side of that safety or pride of the thinnerness. The flip side of that is the dread and fear that you could regain the weight at any moment. And then food becomes a humongous threat to you. It becomes incredibly threatening. You have to be afraid of it. And do you see now where the diet industry has played such an enabling role for you? Because they gave you, especially the food addiction model, where you abstain from your addiction, which is all sugar, where they're giving you some sense of control. Not questioning the thin supremacy that is actually the reason why you're doing it, right? Because I'm thinner, I feel so good about myself. I get to wear these cute clothes, and my life is so much better because that's the most important thing about life. It's being able to wear clothes, That's like the fantasy of someone who's never been thin. So this is where, when you were overweight growing up, you might have fantasized that thinner people's lives are better because they get to wear.
So much easier,
And that is an illusion, right? It's actually people who don't care about their weight, they're free. People who don't use weight as an emphasis of their worth, they're free. Because they don't have to defend anything. They don't have to work to hold on to anything. They don't feel bad if there's fluctuations. They're also not as prone to jump onto extreme radical diets. That to them would seem just unrealistic, sounds like a zealot, like a radicalized religious ideology, super extremism. Right? And so in their minds, they're like, there's a level of realism in their thought process around food and their body image. Right? Because the thing is this, people who do not use body image in any way, right? It means I had one male client who was 300-400 pounds, and his body image he used to his advantage. He became the funny guy. He made fun of people who were thin and exercised. So he identified with his larger body in a way to feel like I'm superior because I don't care that I'm overweight. But in reality, he did. He was compensating for that, right? I'm talking about all of it. All of it doesn't exist, as if you're blind. If you're blind, does your body image really have power anymore? Whether it's fatness or thinness or anything in between, or bodybuilding or, voluptuousness, does it really have any power if you're blind to the side of it and blind to the side of other people's view of it? What happens to the identity that people create with their body image? Becomes pointless. Right? So for you, growing up overweight and feeling bad about your weight and having binge eating and bulimia, going into anorexia because it was, for your food addiction, and then being thinner and getting that pride of thinness, you lived in that pride and isolation for over a decade. Is that something you really want to go back and do?
No.
Right? Because was it really freeing for you? Was it really freeing? We could say that there was change in your clothing, right? But is that really, should it be as important? That distortion. The cognitive distortion isn't just feeling shame about your weight beyond what you should, right? It's also the pride of the thinness beyond what you should. Both sides kind of, actually, the pride and the thinness oftentimes creates the equal opposite shame on the fatness side of it.
There's the rebound.
Mm-hmm. You got it. That's why I believe everybody who, at least that I've worked with, ultimately are thin supremacists. Whether you're a binge eater who's 300 pounds or you're an anorexic who's trying to maintain 122.37,
Mm-hmm.
you're managing the idea or the illusion that thinnerness creates superiority, safety, value, and you believe it to be true, not just systemic truth. You've internalized it as a truth, as if it's an unquestionable reality,
Right.
to the point where you're super defined by your weight and you can't let it go, right? But that's our goal.
That's our goal. Yeah.
That's our goal, is to let it go, to become indifferent both directions, to where you no longer want to be identified in your own mind by the body image, by any type of body image. Because don't you agree, I think, and I said this a little bit ago to you. I said it really comes down to how do you value the life that you've been given here in this lifetime? You've been given a life, and the body is giving it to you. The body you're in has given you life. You're conscious, you're aware, okay? How much value have you given it? Or are you waiting for someone else to define the value of the life you've been given? Do you need someone else to tell you your life is valuable?
Yeah, I feel like I'm not doing that for myself.
This right here is a very important part of recovery. You have to take responsibility to value your own life, the one you're experiencing. It is your experience right now. You have to value that. If you don't, you're going to be driven, because of the need for us to feel needed in a tribe. You're going to be driven for someone to tell you your value. And this is basically a reactive, dependent way to say I have esteem, right? We call it self-esteem, but you know as well as I do, it's not self-esteem. You haven't done that yet.
Mm-hmm.
It's thin esteem. It's addiction esteem.
Yeah.
That whole system. To identify as an addict, super dysfunctional. Even that, you're backed into a corner. You'll never change, right?
Definitely, yeah.
So what is your life worth? What is it worth for you to stay here? What do you need from the body? What type of demands do you want to make from the body?
I need my body to help me be in my life, help me function and be in my life.
And it's been doing that this whole time, right?
It has. Mm-hmm. It has.
So it's pretty cruel to expect the body to have to be thin for you to value the life that it's providing. And then for you to then feel resentment about having to starve yourself to do that, right? And it's not just it's that codependency with dieting. If you did not believe that your life is only valuable if the body you're in is thin, you would not have this codependent relationship with dieting, with the diet industry. That completely has enabled you weak to even know what hunger feels like, to understand how to do it and how your body responds,
See, I still have that idea that if I don't lose weight, I'm not valuing my body. You know what I mean?
Don't lose weight. You are not
punishing my body.
Yeah, no. Yeah, that's backwards. That absolutely is what you've been taught from the diet industry.
Yeah.
Because basically, for you to have that statement, you're basically saying that the body you're in with the fat that it has isn't valuable. It's not valuable. I'm not valuing it because of as if it's done something to you with that fat, or that it can't handle the fat that's been created, when it clearly is handling it just fine. Right? Again, this is the guilt part of the body image industry, right? Feeling bad that this has happened, not questioning the years of deprivation for why your issues with food went way up when you left isolation.
Yeah.
So everything points to why you suck, and you have agreed to it. Not questioning the actual deprivation and the years of anorexia as the problem. That enabled you to, and then to define you as terrible, and you don't have self-control, and you need to go back into the diet world, and you've done to the body. Well, actually, what's happened to the body is a direct reflection of the years of deprivation.
Yeah.
Right? So when you actually value the body it is right now, when you take out the thin supremacy, which is what creates the idea that you're not valuing your body unless you let it lose weight. Like you have to make it lose weight. Like, what do you need to do to help it lose weight? What do you...
Like, yeah.
You need a diet. You need some type of control.
Yeah.
Because you know what? If you don't do this diet, you are hating your body. Well, the reality is you're hating on your body already.
Right.
So, and hating the body as if you married thinness, and I didn't marry this fat body, and you know what? It'll be all good when it's thin enough for me. Then it'll be a healthy marriage.
Yeah.
That's you. That's not some abusive asshole you married.
Definitely.
But in the end, right, as much as I'm saying that's you, is it really you, or is it the asshole that you married in the diet industry?
Yeah, it's the programming.
Good job. It's the programming. You wouldn't feel bad. First of all, your behavior with food is understandable. See, this is where we started the session today. The behavior, the explosive behavior out of that type of deprivation is totally forgivable. Anybody in that type of environment trying to create a third world restrictive environment for that many years, when they no longer have the safety of their controlled environment, will have overcompensating issues. Is that something to be judged? Take a dog in captivity, right? Take a dog who's not been able to eat, and you're giving him tiny little scraps because you like thinner dogs, right? What do you think is going to happen when it gets out of the cage?
Yeah, he's going to
go find some food. And then should you say it has no self-control? Terrible dog. Look what it's done to its body. You don't love your body unless you go back in the cage.
Yeah, that's mean.
You hear the Stockholm syndrome of it all? And you're the one that goes back in the cage with your tail between your legs thinking my body needs to be fixed for me to love it. So I'm going to go back into isolation with food to feel better about myself because it's healthy.
Yeah.
Right. This is going to require that you accept this body right now. That you could actually live in this body forever. And you don't believe there's something wrong with it. And it's forgivable. Is the body you're in right now forgivable? Is this overweight body fat that you just recently gained because of the negotiations to overconsume, thinking you're going to go back in the cage, right?
Right.
Should you feel bad? As if you knew better.
Yeah, I mean, it is a natural response to the dieting.
Yeah, wouldn't anybody in that environment do the same thing? Anybody who believes what you believed about thinness, who had your perceptions about it, who had your degree of desperate need for it, who lived in that much isolation to where it enabled you terribly weak. Okay? You have no physical sensation of your body. You were living on a strict ritual diet for over a decade. Anybody in that circumstance would have compensated the same way under the environment that you're in.
Yeah.
And should you have that much shame about it? Is it really worthy of shame? Shame or guilt, terribly negative emotions to where it's defining your suckiness. Do you really suck, or was the isolation sucky? Your lack of ability with food, does it define your suckiness or the suckiness of being isolated?
Yeah, it's the isolation.
Yeah, it's what happens when you follow such strict, restrictive food programs. This is what happens. You end up becoming really weak to know the body and know your environment and know how you're going to respond to food. And it creates a ton of fear and anxiety. And so what you experienced isn't your suckiness. It's not your lack of ability. It's the system's lack of ability in reality. It is that removed from reality. So anybody living in that type of removed environment is going to have a similar response when they're put into reality without their crutches. Right? It's almost like sitting in a wheelchair for 10 years because you're told that you can't use your legs, you suck, right? And you are removed from the wheelchair and then they say, look, you can't walk, you're super weak. That means you suck and your legs don't work. Well, is it the legs not working, or is it because the legs have been atrophied from sitting in a crutch wheelchair for years? Makes sense? It's the response to being in such a tight, rigid, structured system. Your reaction getting out of it is exactly the same as anybody else's who have been enabled to be that weak and incompetent with food because of the environment. So it's a reflection of how shitty the environment is relative to reality. Right? The only reason why you've given that structure any power is because you were getting high off of the thinness in it.
Yeah.
Right? And the sucky part is you cannot bring yourself to go back. So you're stuck in this state of overeating because you keep on thinking, oh, I'm going to restrict again, but you can't do it because it was really inhumane and you don't want to go back. Do you really want food restriction to be the 90% of your waking life again?
No.
Okay, that's the problem. is you don't want to go back into that restriction, but yet you're still feeling as if you should be that thin. The thinness that took 90% obsessiveness to keep.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
So you have to go inside your heart and you have to really ask yourself, does it make sense to even want to pursue that thinnerness anymore? Because ultimately the overeating you've been doing is because you've, in your mind, thought, I got to be the thin person again. Right?
Yeah.
So you're consuming thinking that you're going to deprive soon, to fix and keep on fixing what damages you keep on doing. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So you get to the point where you're like, we got to stop. Right? So we've got you to pause for a moment. Take a deep breath and really think about, do I really need to pursue thinness at this point? And should I feel bad about what's happened physically, thinking I'm going to go back into that cage? You wouldn't have overeaten the way you've been doing if you knew you weren't going to go back into that cage.
Yeah.
Right?
That's I've been thinking about that too. I do think, I mean, I do see even this past couple of days of not restricting myself that I just feel calmer and I feel like I'm not going off, you know what I mean? And going off on eating, which.
You surprised?
I am surprised a bit.
Do you not have trust in me?
Well, no, I mean, you know, it's just, I of course think I'm terminally unique, you know what I mean?
Yes, I do understand. But because you've had such an issue with the impulsiveness for so long, that you honestly believed you needed to be restricted. And now you're realizing, without the restrictions, without the shame, the guilt, the morality around the restrictions, without the pressure to be thin, all of a sudden the impulsivity is going away. So it's maybe reorienting your perception here, because you've only saw it from one side. That's the only side you were ever taught.
Yeah.
And you're looking back going, that's not true. How is it then that I'm eating these highly palatable foods that before I was addicted to, and I don't have the same impulsiveness and lack of control, and you don't have the same anxiety or panic attacks, right? That anxiety that you used to have is gone, right? Or diminishing. So it really kind of opens, it's really mind opening, isn't it? To be able to really go into this process and see that the results are different. And we haven't done anything. We haven't done anything other than talk about body image. And then, you know what? Just listen to your body. Give yourself lenience to figure this out. There's no shame. There's no guilt. We don't have any expectations. You'll learn it over time, right? So there's no emphasis on that really, except for you need to, eventually you'll learn it. The emphasis that you and I have been focusing on is thin supremacy, the high that you got in your thinness, the shame that you have in your fatness, being identified by a thin person, married to the thinner body, you know, and that required isolation is if you have Stockholm syndrome, can't leave the house unless you're thin enough, can't have food unless you're thin enough, right?
Right.
So you remove yourself from that hostage environment and you aren't as nuts as you've always been told. You're not addicted the way you always believed, and you wholeheartedly internalized and believed that.
Yes, I did.
I don't think people are maliciously teaching that. They just don't know. They don't have the separation from it to reorient to see it from a different angle, you know? That's all I'm providing for you is like, here's a different perspective. Try this out and see what happens. Right?
It's so different. It's so different.
Right? Well, it's the reverse of what you're doing. It's like taking what you believed and flipping it inside out.
Yeah.
Right? So it's Opposite. Accepting the body as it is. And then the freedom you get to eat. All of a sudden, your issues with food diminish significantly.
Yeah.
This is why I spent so much time studying Stockholm Syndrome. And reading articles on battered wife syndrome and narcissism, and why I believe the symptoms go away so quickly. It's like, gone. If it was a mental illness, the issues would respond to medication. Those of you out there who've had this know medication doesn't do anything. You know? And so syndromes like this don't respond to medication because it's not an actual problem of a cause. It's a problem as the consequence. So we could say addiction is a consequence. So until you get rid of the cause, the obsessive compulsiveness and impulsivity isn't going to go away. You're going to constantly have battle your weakness, if that makes sense. We can, but what makes it weak? What makes you weak? The obvious thing here, what makes you weak with food? Is it the narcotic draw of food? Is it the palatability of food? Or is it the fact that you've had so much reliance on diets and restrictions and used it with morality that has created the weakness with food? And keep in mind that you've also symbolized thinness as what makes humans superior. Do you think that might have anything to do with your issues with food?
Definitely.
Yeah. You hear that now and you're like, obvious. That's an obvious link. Whereas before you never would have thought that your desire to be thin had anything to do with this food addiction.
No.
Right?
Yeah.
I know. Once you kind of come out of it to look and you can see it from a broader perspective, all of a sudden it makes sense. There's a lot of sense in it. There isn't as much confusion. It's like, it should help your shoulders just drop. You should feel like you can breathe. Like, oh my gosh, it's understandable. I'm not crazy.
Yeah.
And the way I've been with food is so understandable. No kidding. No wonder. You isolate yourself to that degree, you're going to lose your body's sensory system of it, and then you're given an environment where there's no boundaries. You're not going to know where to stop and when to start.
Right.
And you shouldn't feel bad about that. You just need to learn that maybe it's the restrictions that are the problem.
Yeah.
And let me rephrase that, because we could actually argue that eating to hunger is a form of restriction, right? Because you could eat at all times. We live in that much abundance. So eating relative to hunger rhythms could be rationalized as restrictive. What I'm talking about is the extreme.
What do you mean when you say eat to hunger? What do you mean?
Eat based on the body's biological rhythms and control of your hunger. So the body gives you a sense, it's like peeing or urinating based on the sense to go pee. Like when you feel the pressure on the bladder and the urethra, that's when you go pee.
Right.
Right. So when I say eat to hunger, I'm talking about that biological sense, not of cravings. That's emotional. It's truly of the mouth and that sense of time constraint that comes truly from I'm physically hungry. It isn't boredom. It isn't because you're stressed out and pissed off and being a victim and a martyr. It's not because you're angry and want to vindicate against someone you're trying to lose weight for. It's none of that narcissistic bullshit. We're talking about if you had to eat based on the truth of the biological regulation of hunger through leptin, right? Which is the hormone I talk about. That's what I'm talking about. That is actually boundaries. That's a boundary. It's like saying if I'm not hungry, this is like when you went to dinner and they brought you all this extra food and you're like, oh my God, I'm full already. the willingness to say, I'm not obligated to eat this just because it's free. Eating based on the fact that you were listening to how your body felt, based feeling full, feeling sated. That's the other side. That's the same biological rhythm. So essentially, you've got to be able to let the body regulate your food consumption, and so that you can have freedom to think about life and think about what really you want in your life and what makes life valuable, your life valuable to you, because it's your life, right? Do you really want to spend your lifetime obsessed around how to eat for hunger and how to eat for health and how to eat for, this and that? And you want to obsess about the macronutrients and micronutrients? Is that what you want to do? Is that what your life's intention is?
So, no, I don't. But the thing at the eat to hunger, you were saying that you could use that as a control thing?
Some people do, yeah. They feel pissed off. If they want to eat for some emotional, usually it's a victim position. They want to eat because they feel they deserve to be compensated for some other hardship in their life. Oftentimes they'll feel burdened by the fact that they're not hungry, and they'll be upset about it, victimized by it, and eat anyways. So people can use the hunger scale as a form of diet restriction, right?
I see.
I'm trying to remember what my point was. That it's not strict. The problem is that you've been so strict. No grace. There's no lenience or grace for reality in the diets that you've used. The diet industry. When does anybody say, you should be cutting carbs, but you can still have carbs, right?
Yeah.
That industry is radical. The diet industry is becoming even more extremist, more extreme and more radical than it was 10 years ago. Which to me is not, it's an indication of the state of mind of the people who are running the show, the businesses of it. So the businesses of dieting, I believe, are being run by orthorexic, anorexic people trying to make money off of their obsessive compulsive disorder. You could say I'm doing the same thing. I'm making money off of helping people free them from it. I'm the same. Difference is this isn't extreme. I'm pretty lenient, right? Granted, to people in that state of mind, what I'm doing is extreme to them.
Yeah.
Right? Because it's the opposite of strict.
Yeah.
Opposite of strict seems to someone with that type of distorted mind seems extreme, because that's how extreme they are in their mind. Take note, you orthorexics. I know, because I've got some listening to this going, oh my God, she's a bitch. I just created a ton of cognitive distortion, or cognitive dissonance for you out there. Your health righteous zealotry. Which is sucky. It sucks to be in that state of mind. It's probably the worst suffering, because they are that isolated. You've been there. You did it for a long time.
Yeah.
It's terrible.
Definitely.
I don't judge it. It's just terrible. But it comes with a lot of narcissism. A lot of pathological narcissists are actually running businesses like that because they believe they're superior and they have the power to control, and people should do what they say, and they tend to suffer the greatest. I think I suffered that way, I was just really young and naive, but if I hadn't have recovered, I'd probably just be just as radicalized.
Yeah.
Anyways. Okay, dearie, we got to be done with this session.
Yeah. Okay.
So let's schedule to follow up. Well, the assignment is to continue to think about this stuff.
Okay.